Hey there, welcome to episode 116 of the Cafe Genius Impresarios audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo. We are recording this at 8:55 in the morning on Friday, May 16, 2025. You can hear my voice is succumbing to the annual allergy showcase, I guess, in the greater Vegas area. Hopefully it will make it through this entire episode. We'll find out. I will drink water now and then. Maybe that will help. I have some water right here. Today's episode, the title, if you didn't see it, Colab Collab Colab. We'll get into what that actually means in a moment. First, if this is your first visit to the Cafe Genius Impresarios audio program, first time listening, welcome. The name, Cafe Genius Impresarios, cafe with two F's, inspired by Cafe Centro, the coffee shop where startups start. In the San Francisco Bay Area, actually in the city of San Francisco, very specifically in South Park, 2 words, which was very near the AT&T ballpark, now the Oracle ballpark. Sadly, Cafe Centro is no longer, but it is where little tiny companies like Twitter kind of got their start, for better or worse. So sorry to see that go. I had been to Cafe Centro several times. I often say that Vegas needs a Cafe Centro. It might have one or two. Depends on who you ask and how you ask it, perhaps. But there may be one, but there should be many. Cafe Centro, where startups start. Genius, this was inspired by the Genius lunches that we used to have around Vegas during the Downtown Project days. I was never a part of Downtown Project, yet I was invited to these lunches because they were very casual, totally ad hoc, just catching up on who's doing what, what's going on, what's up, what's down, etc. Not quite gossip, but maybe close to that, but also practical and productive. So the Genius lunches, I will make a point later in the episode that we should bring those back, and anyone can do it. You can do it. No trademarks. And finally, impresarios with 2 S's. Those are people doing cool things. So Cafe Genius Impresarios, this audio program. Hopefully wherever you found this audio program. In fact, you're able to locate the episode description, which contains the show notes, a summary that I will read to you, and the links for today's episode. 4 shameless self-promotion links. Yes, I need to pare that down to like 2 or 1. We'll have to see. I mean, I can pare it down to 2 immediately. And then 2 about collab with 1 L and collab with 2. Who's better than you? So let's get started so we can get finished. This Friday, May 16th, 2025. The summary, we all have some ideas. Right out the gate. We all have some idea what collaboration is. That's with 2 L's. Sometimes abbreviated as collab, or collab, C-O-L-L-A-B. But what is a collab, C-O-L-A-B, which is an abbreviation for colaboratory? And what in the world is Colab Collab Colab? Actually, I guess it would be Colab Collab Colab, the title of today's episode. That's what it is. The shameless self-promotion links, there are 4. But here's the thing. 2 of them are at Buy Me a Coffee and 2 of them are at Coffee. So can I consolidate them? I guess. buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo has my freeform profile with links to my various audio programs, my various GitHub organizations and the projects they're in, some affiliate links to my favorite coffee beans on Amazon, some biographical information, and a link to the posts section, which is the second link. Buy me an update, a 5-minute or less microcast published every Monday, usually in the morning, available exclusively on buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo/posts. By the way, you're under no obligation to spend any money at these. You can if you want. Your proceeds, when they arrive, will be applied to the next bag of coffee beans or maybe some coffee accessories. You never know. It's what powers this entire operation. So the first 2 are Buy Me a Coffee links. The next 2, Ko-fi.com, Ko-fi.com. That hyphen is next to the 0 on your keyboard. Ko-fi.com/DanHugo for some this and that. But the really interesting part is Coffee Solo, ko-fi.com/DanHugo/post. It is a not scheduled, not specific, just random audio program I like to refer to it as a precursor to the proper launch of Hugo Floss, which will be any day now. Hugo Floss, I intend to have video component, maybe live streams. That'd be fun. The 2 links regarding today's episode: example of Colab, colab.google. Google has a top level domain, aren't they special? So colab.google, and it is a colaboratory. In this case, it's a Jupyter notebook servers available for free and so on. But colaboratory, you can even search for a Google colaboratory collaboration, and they have articles about that. So they're down. They get it. Another spelling of colaboratory makes it look like collaboratory or collaboration. So it's spelled with 2 L's, and I have the Wikipedia page for that. Probably collaboratory with 2 L's predates colaboratory with 1 L. But to be honest, I prefer to go with the 1 L, colaboratory, as in a shared collaboration space. If you read the colaboratory with 2 L's, see? Too many L's. If you read that Wikipedia page, you can see that it's basically describing a shared laboratory or a laboratory, what I would say, context without boundaries. So it could be a physical space, a virtual space, the communication between people in different spaces, etc., etc. So I prefer the term colaboratory for a context, a space, a place, a set of resources, virtual, real, in person, where discussion and maybe collaboration can take place. But when you think about it, I will mention this again later. But if you think a coffee shop, if you think of that as a co-laboratory, you can go to a coffee shop and sit at a table, and maybe your co-founder or somebody you are discussing a potential project with or something like this. You can collaborate with 2 L's, collaborate at one table, and then in one table over, some other people can collaborate amongst themselves, but you're all sharing this space, the resources available, the coffee, the lights, the Wi-Fi, free or otherwise, access to the restrooms, maybe snacks. So it's kind of a collaboratory. Anyway, that's what we're going to talk about today. So hopefully that makes perfect sense. If not, let's talk about it some more. How about some background first? I am a big fan of collaboration with 2 L's, where people, so essentially collaboratory is 1 L, collaboration is 2 L's. So that's basically how I will use these words today and in general, where people work together or collaborate, which is also 2 L's, to accomplish some goal. Usually this goal is mutually beneficial or of mutual interest, or maybe people are paid to collaborate, and so it is of mutual financial interest. But whatever the case, this is about sharing insights, expertise, and action to reach some milestone, or maybe in the end goal itself. As you can see from the Wikipedia article, if you do read it on colaboratory with 2 L's, and again, I'm going to go with the 1 L version, there's a term collaboratory with 2 L's. Oh, see, I already wrote that. That is aimed more at the space or maybe even the context, which is a little bit more generic. So I'm going to probably use context more. Physical space, virtual, online, just the notion, maybe shared reference materials that are available in a co-laboratory, et cetera, et cetera. A context of collaboration with 2 L's, but this can be confusing. So when I stumbled upon Google's use of the term with a single L as a co-laboratory to indicate the same idea as in the Wikipedia article, in their case, some gratis software that they provide online, so that's the Jupyter notebooks, I found some use of this different spelling to, well, differentiate the act of collaborating and the context of the collaboration in a co-laboratory. See, it all makes sense now. A co-laboratory has no boundaries, no sense of scale, so a whole planet might be a co-laboratory, in which case the answer is probably 42 in that case. Or an online discussion group, or an in-person community of practice. These are all forms of co-laboratories in some sense. Not everyone in a co-laboratory is necessarily working on the same thing, so the space or context is shared and lacks specific boundaries. So it's not exclusive. You're not locking the resource for yourself. If you want to have a laboratory space that is only yours, you can probably arrange that. A studio, an office, and a co-work space with a locking door that you have exclusive access to, and things like this, things of this nature. If you sit in a coffee shop and co-work with someone, and at the next table, some other people are co-working, these two collaborations are taking place in a colaboratory. See, I already told you that, but I did warn you that I was going to tell you again. So we used to have a meetup colaboratory. When Cafe Genius formed, and it formed because of the monthly pitch workout room, which actually had some other events other than the monthly event. But it was generally, hey, Cafe Genius pitch workout room. Okay, I needed a name to kind of umbrella that and some other stuff. So one of the other stuff was a meetup colaboratory to discuss how to have more effective, even productive meetups in the context of this next wave of so-called startup scenery evolving in the greater Vegas area. Today, I would call it the entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem, of course. I think startup scene is a little bit too simple and too limiting. The startup scene would be within that ecosystem. So the so-called startup scene is a particular colaboratory within the ecosystem, if you like. Our discussions in this colaboratory were not collaborations with two L's, since we were not planning meetups. We were not actually meeting to plan meetups. We're not having a meetup to plan meetups. We were having a meetup to talk about other people planning meetups, including the people in the colaboratory. Rather, discussing ideas and examples of gatherings and programmed events that worked or did not work, and some possibilities for the future to make the most of any momentum that was gathering in the scene, or rather the ecosystem. I could argue that the pitch workout room was a form of a colaboratory as well, where individuals working on a pitch, or maybe an idea for a pitch or some notion, come together, some doing the same, others there to observe or contribute their feedback or just to learn. All would come away with some learnings of some sort. These people are not necessarily collaborating on the individual startups or project ideas, only the pitches or the stories or the general presentation of these in a collaboratory space. So if you would call it collaboration, it was more like co-learning or kind of open brainstorming. I mean, if you go to an open mic, which is what the pitch workout room was patterned after, there is a collaboration between the person on stage and the audience, I suppose. But it is a collaboratory. The person on stage is not collaborating with the next person on stage. So this is a collaboratory environment with some forms of collaboration, but other forms of maybe even competition. But either way, it probably seems more complicated than it is, but I do like to keep the two terms separate to imply what the meaning is of the term as it's used. So here we are. So developing a collab. The first two words in the title of today's episode, Colab Collab, so one L, two L's, intended to mean that there could or should be a collaboration of several parties, individuals, groups, companies, maybe parts of our government, which I frown on myself, from diverse backgrounds and in various corners of the ecosystem to ponder how the collaboratory concept might apply to the entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem of the greater Vegas area, if it doesn't apply already, or how to apply it in a more grand scale, how to make people aware of this general notion. We can take the literal version of this idea with various coffee shops, co-work spaces, maker spaces, and other shared physical resources, not to mention any virtual resources that fit this bill. The collabs exist in various forms, and people do use them, whether they realize it or not. Go to, what's it called? It starts with a V. The coffee shop in downtown Vesta. It sounds like Vespa. Vesta Coffee is one of several spots that you could argue is a collaboratory. So the Colab Collab, now it's even getting to me, is intended to be about sorting out what there is, what's on the asset map perhaps, and what might be lacking. There is the new innovation district plan for Clark County, which will be down around on the 210 somewhere between the Innovation Center and the UNLV campus and the Harry S. Reid Tech Park, which is near IKEA, which I've talked about this a few times, and which we can go into more if it moves along some construction timeline. I'm honestly not sure if they've even started or if they will. Construction by street, but that is only one example of what some might think might be a need to fill, a need to fill that need, not I need to fill something, a need to fill that need. There are likely others. So which colaboratory resources, tools, methods, and maybe we could say context do we have, which do we need, and which are somewhere in the middle? By the way, the owners of the physical versions of these are, of course, in on any such collaboration. So in other words, one of the things that always sort of bothers me about meetups is you find probably a coffee shop or something, and you have a bunch of people showing up, and then they leave, and the coffee shop owner doesn't participate in this. Depending on the nature of your gathering, what if the coffee shop owner, and it could be something other than a coffee shop, but for this example, what if the coffee shop owner had a calendar that they could advertise and, hey, this is going to be an event every Thursday, and they could actually reserve a table, and they could tell people, or people might ask. I've had meetups in coffee shops, and a person will walk into the coffee shop and they don't know me. I don't know them. You know, we have a table for 8 people or so, and they walk in and they say, hey, I'm looking for the meetup. And the person at the counter is like, I don't know what that is. So if there was a little bit more collaboration between people hosting these gatherings and the venues, if you're going to do a formal organized gathering like that, that might be interesting. So that is a form of collaboration on the collab. So Colab Collab, first step. Now the outer collab. So remember, it's Colab Collab Colab. Here's where the larger outer collaboratory becomes interesting. I am talking about ecosystem scale, possibly the entire Greater Vegas area, as a context facilitating the inner collaborations about the colaboratories. Note the plural there. You may have heard me mention specifically and refer to casually the notion of silos and how there are insular, that is insulated, groups in the Greater Vegas area which do not really communicate well enough to know if they could benefit from communicating, that is, with other siloed groups and organizations. It's a real thing. It's not, I didn't come up with that. Other people have noticed and commented on this scenario. It's the nature of the culture, perhaps. It's just the way it is for now. If you remember a few moments ago, I was speaking of the Meetup Collaboratory, where we were looking specifically at what it would take to have better, more effective, more productive meetups here, maybe here and there, in the Greater Vegas area. This is a similar idea, discussing how to make a more effective, more productive context for collaborations of any kind in a variety of collaboratories. If we actually read the title from right to left, we want a collaboratory that's a context to enable and support several collaboration efforts focused on making better and more effective collaboratory contexts. Now it makes perfect sense, right? Let's look back at the downtown project. Back in my spectator days, looking in on the downtown project when I was in town, people used to call me, and that was not hello, not how are you doing? Are you in? Are you in town? Are you in Vegas? Where are you? That was probably the most common. Where are you? So I observed these two things, though. And these are observations of my own. If we ever have a retrospective, or even better, an actual collaboratory that would look into, examine, and perhaps benefit from what's learned, well, what could be learned. But for now, my opinion, there were a lot of resources poured into the collaboratory, including physical spaces. The gold spike conversion is one example that is still kind of amazing when you think about it. Remove all the gambling machines and replace them with beanbags and couches. Make the Wi-Fi free. Come on in. Work on your startup. Have a drink if you want. If the restaurant was open, go out into the back. Enjoy the grass. Enjoy the outdoor seating. Kind of a big swing, if you like. So that's one example. There were several. Planned and organized meetups, from the Downtown Lowdown to the weekly dinner meetups at the Work in Progress to the Downtown Podcast and more. And of course, the general serendipitous collision concept and proactive efforts to bring people into proximity to drive these collisions. So this was a variety of people coming to visit, coming to see what's going on here in the Downtown Project. They would usually end up at the Downtown Podcast. So I met some very interesting characters and never talked to them again. That's wonderful. But that was the nature of the beast. There was the second thing, there was not a lot of organic collaboration. And I pointed this out contemporaneously. That is to say, the various startup efforts were not necessarily seeking ways to help each other for mutual benefit, to develop horizontal collaborations. Again, I did point this out at the time that it made no sense to me that people who could probably benefit from partnerships and other forms of collaboration, and these would be two-way or maybe even n-way benefits, directly, indirectly, or long tail, etc. If the collaborations were initiated or even explored, and from what I gathered at the time, this wasn't really happening. So in other words, come to Vegas, form your startup in downtown, and if nobody tells you, oh, by the way, you can also collaborate with others, and it might actually help your efforts, and the collaboration can take any form. But without mentioning that, I honestly don't know if people had that thought, or if they figured I got to be heads down working on my startup, and unless I'm going to go to some event with maybe some music or a barbecue, or Big Earl's barbecue, and maybe some beer or maybe some whatever. Anyway, there was always some distraction. But the bridge between I'm an entrepreneur and, oh, you're an entrepreneur, maybe we can help each other, I don't know if that just didn't come to people, or if it did happen, it was not often. And again, I ask people, I don't know if you can hear that jet flying over. Sorry. It's a Air Force Base, Nellis, I think, probably from Nellis. There's definitely Nellis Air Force Base. I'm assuming the plane is from there. Could be Creech, but probably Nellis. So the notion to me was, hey, if you're going to bring all these entrepreneurial personalities into proximity, they should be able to figure out, like, oh, you know what? It would be cool if you're working on this, I'm working on that. We could cross promote each other. And I will say this, by the way, and I'm ad-libbing right now. I didn't write this down. I found exactly the same thing when it comes to mobile food vendors, i.e. food trucks, in the Bay Area, in the Silicon Valley Bay Area. The notion of, hey, we should cross-promote each other, and we should do events together, and we should make sure that we tell people about other events, not just the ones we're at, because every time you add some new food truck fan, that increases the total population size and is ultimately beneficial for all people operating food trucks. And here in Vegas, there was a definite, why would I promote someone else? So I don't know if it was the culture that was sort of, could it just be dumped on people when they arrived? Because not everybody in the downtown project, working on their startups was from the Vegas area. Some were from elsewhere. But maybe it's just because it wasn't happening. Maybe the culture kind of laid down the base, BASE, and people who might have said, I wonder if it would make sense to reach out to other, well, nobody else is, I guess I won't. So that would be interesting. That might be something to try to glean from a retrospective questionnaire. Anyway, I think the problem, if I can call it a problem with the downtown project approach, was that there was no explicit awareness at large that there was a colaboratory environment cultivated in the downtown geography and the virtual equivalent with people visiting or working remotely in the larger virtual collaboratory context. Maybe this was a question of permission, maybe that's the word, or that the downtown project effort, the entire notion of inviting people to pursue their startup dreams, my words, within the llama-shaped downtown project and the related notion of return on community did not encourage, maybe didn't validate the notion of collaborating horizontally, focusing instead on each startup making progress itself. Maybe. Now, ideally, an imported or otherwise gathered population of entrepreneurs would come up with this notion on their own. I think that was happening in Silicon Valley, and the food truck example is sort of a parallel take on that. If you place a dozen or so entrepreneurs in a room, they do not need permission nor convincing to interact, ponder, or even maybe begin some conversations about mutually beneficial collaborations, or at the very least, some referrals. Like, oh, do you know anybody doing that? Oh, yeah, I know 25 people doing that. Or maybe just one, the one you need to talk to. Would having specific collaboration networking events in the downtown project, Colaboratory, have given that permission or driven the energy perhaps to have the individual startups and similar efforts actually step beyond, hey, we know each other already, which I have a feeling was happening, and change that to, hey, we could actually help each other succeed. And I honestly don't know if that was happening. And so again, that would be a great retrospective questionnaire item or items. So what about Greater Vegas today? I may have talked about Greater Vegas once or twice previously in other episodes. I have mentioned this before, in fact, explicitly, the need for a second startup scene that is focused on those already pursuing their efforts, making progress, and maybe even looking for some collaboration possibilities with others doing the same or similar phase or place in a timeline, not working on similar things in particular. Or maybe just some referrals, or maybe referrals to resources or people. Maybe they're local or otherwise. Is there something wrong with the few gatherings and organized meetups taking place today? Maybe not, but I would posit there is still too much emphasis on someone planning a meetup, posting it on that site so named, or maybe Eventbrite or Facebook or LinkedIn or wherever else, and putting in some level of effort regarding venue, food, maybe a theme, maybe guest speakers. You do a lot of work just to convince people to show up. They got to manage outreach and maybe advertising in some cases and so on. This to me feels forced. Why do these have to be productions? Well, I've mentioned the Genius Lunches. I start off this episode, and I usually do with all of our Cafe Genius Impresarios episodes, filling in the backstory on the origin of the name. The Genius Lunches, the name of which inspired the Cafe Genius name, of course, and how these were ad hoc gatherings more than once at the same restaurant, but not necessarily bound to that location, so it could be anywhere, and not so organized as needing a post on a website to manage. Literally a text message or an email, and then, hey, bring anybody you want. And it was kind of up to you to say, you know what, I think this other person I know might be a fit for this little crowd here. And they were always interesting. So that is a viable option. This was an understanding by those participating that we could discuss our various endeavors in this colaboratory context and then go back to those endeavors. So it wasn't structured. It wasn't formally organized. It wasn't the Genius Lunch meetup. We're going to discuss things going on. It was just sort of tacit, implied, if you like. So yeah. Oh, Genius Lunch. Sure. When is it? Tuesday? All right. Where is it? Okay. I'll be there. Can I bring some? Yeah. Okay. I know I'm going to invite someone else. That's it. No, you don't have to RSVP on Meetup, or you don't have to sign up and follow the right person on LinkedIn, all that. This could, and in fact should, be happening here in Vegas, outside of the various Meetup and Eventbrite and other events and gatherings coordinated in the same old turn of the crank. Let's be honest, if you need to pay Meetup to post your event, and then in some cases pay for or find sponsors to pay for victuals to get people to show up, we have a problem. Whether it's your event, would people turn out without the food, for example, or the people who seem to have come to expect that you're going to do something for me so that I will show up for something that will ultimately benefit me in that same me. So, I'll go to your event as long as there's free food, or if it's worth my time. Well, okay, yeah, I guess that makes some sense. But maybe it'll be worth your time without free food. Or maybe it'll be worth your time if you go and help out to make it a better event. Who can say? But it is something that someone should be examining in detail, and in fact, which is something I've talked about already multiple times. The Genius Roundtable, Initiative 2025, Second Startup Scene, and more, about making this sort of thing happen, and in the way I just described, in fact. So that's Greater Vegas today. What about Greater Vegas tomorrow? I dipped a toe. I was literally flabbergasted because I misspelled toe. We don't have to go into detail. I just corrected that. I dipped a toe in the water regarding legislation that may or may not pass and get signed into law in early June or so, maybe before, but the session ends, June 2nd? And certainly there are existing meetups with the same people, some new meetups with some new people, but doing similar things, and some other events that feel to me like they're forced, maybe overly curated. And I also think that they kind of feel like they're repetitious. The Bootstrappers Breakfast, for example, that I used to run for a couple of years, it got repetitious, and people would show up, or they would show up and it would be the same group of people So, okay, you're working on the same thing. Okay, we're all doing the same thing. And that wasn't really the intent of the meetup, but that's sort of what it fell into. So I don't know how it's going today. I haven't been to one of those in a long time. But there are meetups that have that theme, and there are people who feel like, oh, I got to go because I went last time and I should go this time. And I don't know that's always the case. The Genius lunches were not that you could just go or not go, or maybe, oh, I'm busy. You'd miss out on a conversation, but that's okay because you'd probably talk to a couple of those people in some other context some other day, and whatever. If anything was really interesting, you'd hear about it. As I'm writing this outline for you today's episode, I am reminding myself that I have suggested at some point, maybe more than one point, some point or more than one point, that we bring back the Genius Lunch. It is easy to do, and there should be more than one, in fact. You might miss one, but you can go to another one, or maybe there's 5 going on any particular day. There should be it should be even easier if there's more than one. Keep the gatherings at about a dozen people, maybe more like 8 to 10. Seating is always tricky, so maybe it's 6 or 8. See what's up. No rules about who can attend or what they are working on or whatever. These are not communities of practice. These are much more casual, much less structured. And we can get some feel, some pulse of the ecosystem at any particular time into the future. And of course, an interesting context for discussions of colaboratories in our ecosystem, collaboration in our colaboratories, and our overarching colaboratory to facilitate all of these, bringing it back to the title, but also some notions and pursuits that lean into actual entrepreneurial innovation, no matter where the focus might be. So not everything is tech. And action advancing those notions and pursuits instead of snacks and presentations over and over again. Let us make things happen and not talk about making things happen over our free victuals. So that's my pitch, and I'm sticking to it. I think it's a combination of trying too hard by some people who are trying. Kudos to some for trying to do something. I think the people that are, if you put quotes around this, in charge, don't know what they're doing or don't have a clear idea what they're doing. The notion that we're going to be the next Silicon Valley, I think, has poisoned some ideas. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Be a better Vegas. Take what's around you, talk to people, get some ideas, go from there. Don't have yet another award show or another pitch night, another demo time. These are all the same things over and over again. They're interesting, but they're turning a crank and they're not advancing a cause. They're filling in a day on a calendar so that someone can check a box that says, I am in the startup scene. I think there's a lot more to it than that. And I think while the greater Vegas area will not be the next Silicon Valley, and it should stop trying, it can be a better Vegas, which does include people doing interesting and innovative things, being entrepreneurial in any number of ways. You don't have to start the next Google or Netflix. You don't have to start the next Facebook. You don't have to be the AI killer app developer. You could be, but don't make that the end all and be all and try to develop a alternate economy around that notion. Elevate the economy. Don't try to make it something that it isn't, the greater Vegas area. Make it greater. Don't make it another place entirely. And when we talked about Austin, we know if you gentrify the area, you're going to change the core economy because the people that make that economy possible won't be able to live here. So I think all this stuff is a lot of food for thought, if you like. These are things that should be talked about and discussed, not by county commissioners or city council or people in business development. What is it? Urban economic development? Is that what the departments are in the cities? They should be answering questions, or they should be saying, how can we facilitate the thing that you're working on? But I have noticed that is not the case here. I ran into that in Silicon Valley, in the real Silicon Valley. There was a lot more interest at the city government level about, hey, that's interesting. How can we be a part of that? How can we help enable that? How can we get the word out about that? And so on. So I think it's time to flip the script. Nobody's going to listen to me about this, but that's what I think. And I think part of the deal would be figuring out what our colaboratory context is at ecosystem scale and figure out what's going on within. And hopefully people will figure out how to collaborate in an effective way and get away from these formulaic meetups and do some interesting collaborations and discussions. Make that startup scene the second startup scene. Make the sequel even better. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for listening. Hopefully my voice was not too annoying. It is a little bit labored, and I'm gonna stop talking after this, believe it or not. So thank you for listening as always, and we'll catch you next week. And don't forget to check out the Coffee Solo. It appears randomly whenever, and all the other episodes, and the Buy Me a Coffee exclusive, Buy Me an Update on Mondays, and so on and so on and so on. All right, I'll leave it there. Thank you. Have a good weekend. Take care.